speak on, you will hear bits and pieces that remind you of my TED Talk, but my goal is to go into a much deeper talk and to a much deeper mechanic than what you would get out of a 15-minute TED Talk. There's just not a lot of time when you do a TED Talk. So what I would like everybody to do is get a visualization of an individual who's homeless in a district or area where a lot of homeless people are populated. I want you to visualize having an encounter with this individual where you're walking by them and you see them leaning over in the gutter. As you're walking by them and see them leaning over in the gutter, you notice that they have a needle and that they're drawing gutter water. As they're drawing gutter water, you immediately recognize that this individual is in such a state of desperation that they are willing to use gutter water to cook fentanyl. Once we have this encounter, I want you to visualize where the beginning of this individual's life started. What did their house look like? Did they have a mom and dad? Where did they go to school? Did they graduate high school? Did they drop out? Did they have any type of college education? Did they have any type of skill set for employment that they had at one point? And once we have the early childhood and the early adult years of their life set up visually, what I want you to do is visualize the next 10 years. What happens to that individual after 10 years of the encounter you just had with them? Do they go to jail or prison? Do they find sobriety and purpose? Do they find gainful employment? Do they become another statistic of an opioid overdose in the United States of America? What I've been doing for the last 12 years is trying to help individuals understand this person and understand some things that may have made it easier for the individual to end up in this situation. There's so much talk about stigma in the United States right now. Most of the stigma is focused on communication. Most of the stigma that you're going to hear me speak about is infrastructure. Because I believe the most important form of communication does not come from the individuals that can speak. It comes from the systems that communicate to this person about who they are, their situation, and what we're willing to do to help their situation. There are stigmas that say that this individual that's in that situation chose that lifestyle. So we should just leave them there. Those are the consequences of the choices they made in their life, and they must deal with those consequences. We have no duty to help those individuals because the choices they made had to do with drugs. The addiction is destructive, and that's a personal choice. They should bear the consequences. There are individuals that believe the answer to the solution is to remove them from society. Arrest them, put them in jail, we don't have to deal with them. Oddly, the same individuals that believe that are also the ones that will sit across from them in a job interview and believe that they're not worthy of gainful employment because they can't be trusted as a result of their records. There are stigmas that believe these individuals lack willpower. And the individual that thinks that it's all about willpower is usually a person that tried something at some point in their life and it didn't control them. So there must be something wrong with you. Because if it didn't take over my life and I can have one drink at night, or I was able to recreationally use in my college years and not find myself in addiction, then this comes down to just knowing when is enough and being able to say, I'm not going to do anymore. But the most important form of stigma is infrastructure. I grew up in Central California. I tell people where I grew up in California, there's no beaches. 30% of the world's produce comes from a 150-mile radius from around where I grew up. In fact, my backyard when I was a young boy was an almond orchard. So there's a lot of farms where I come from, but also in this really small city in the middle of California is a town called Clovis. Clovis Unified was one of the top public schools in the United States when my parents moved us to Clovis so we could go to school there. They were most known for their sports programs. They had back-to-back national baseball champions at Clovis High School. The United States' best wrestlers come from Clovis North and Buchanan High School every single year. Nationally recognized softball programs, football programs, basketball programs. It was a sports-rich community. So I did what every other kid did when we were younger. We got involved in sports. My first dream was to go to the NBA. I remember being the short white kid from the middle of California telling my dad that I was going to graduate from the University of Michigan. After I graduated from the University of Michigan, so I could be like the Fab Five, I told my dad that I was going to get drafted into the NBA. By the time I got to sixth grade, the high school coaches were coming to watch me run point guard. The middle school coaches were coming to watch me run point guard. It was really clear by the time I got to sixth grade that the short white kid could play basketball. But when I got to seventh grade, some things changed that people couldn't see. The things that changed, people couldn't see because I wasn't talking about it. When I got to seventh grade, I had this overwhelming feeling that I needed to kill myself. I didn't know where this feeling was coming from. The only thing that I knew is that when I got to campus, I was extremely uncomfortable. I would try and stop these uncomfortable emotions from occurring, but the more I tried to stop them from occurring, the more they seemed to come up. The louder they seemed to come up, the more I started to hate myself and think that there was something wrong with me. I used to look at my peers and think that everybody was fine and nobody was experiencing what I was experiencing, and nobody would understand what I was experiencing if I told them, which further made me hate myself. I got to this point where I couldn't stop these emotions from occurring and this discomfortable feeling from occurring. And so I started to believe that the only way that I could fix this situation was to just take my life altogether. I was struggling with anxiety at this time. I didn't even know I had social anxiety. It took me 20 years after middle school to learn that I had social anxiety while I started sitting down with a therapist and dissecting my early childhood. This social anxiety would stir up, guys and girls would start exchanging phone numbers in middle school, big groups of people would start clicking together, and I wasn't able to interact with my peers in this way because of my social anxiety. So I started to isolate away from individuals. When I started to isolate away from people, the stuff that I was dealing with started to become even louder because as human beings, we're supposed to be connected with each other. It's why the pandemic and all these lockdowns have created so much turmoil with students. In all of my years of speaking, I have never gotten the phone calls that I have gotten this year about the struggles with mental health and their students using substances. It's a direct correlation between disconnecting students from their peers and forcing them to sit with themselves. Well, I forced myself to be by myself as a result of my social anxiety. And I was having this experience with my father. Before my basketball games would start, I would sit down in the seats next to my teammates and I would look to the end of the gym. I would look to the end of the gym and I would have a conversation with myself before every one of these games. I would say, "Come on, Dad. Come on, Dad. You promised me. You promised me you were getting off of work this time." I didn't understand why Jason's mother and father could show up to all of his games. I didn't understand why Jose's mom and dad made it to all his basketball games. I didn't understand why Brent's dad not only came to the basketball games, Brent's dad came to all the practices. I was looking for my hero to come through the doors. I was waiting for my father to show up for me the way he promised me, but I never got to see my dad come through those doors. And what I was about to do at 12 years old was something I had no idea at this time, and it took many years in therapy to understand how this situation was the foundation for many of the behaviors that I would go off and start to do in my daily life. One of the things that I was about to do was assign a belief system about who I am and what I'm capable of doing in the world as a result of this experience with my father. I later learned that the stories we create about the experiences that we have are far more important than the experience themselves, because once we create the story, regardless of whether it's true or not, the experience is validated by that story, and the story creates the behavior that we go out and live into the world. So what I said was, my dad doesn't love me. I'm not good enough. That's why my dad's not here. If I was good enough, if my dad loved me, he would be here. I didn't realize that my father's absence was very real. The emotions and the abandonment that I felt from my father not showing up to my games was very real. The story that I attached about my relationship with my father was not, because my dad did love me. My dad does love me. But my dad was working 14-hour days. He dropped out of high school so he could marry my mom. They've been married for 46 years in November. My dad was told by my grandpa that if he didn't have $5,000 in the bank, he couldn't marry his daughter. So my dad dropped out of high school, went and got a job, put $5,000 in the bank and said, I'm going to marry your daughter now. Well, because he did that, he also was in a line of work where he couldn't just take off of work. So my father was working 14-hour days so I could have Michael Jordan shoes, so I could have the best baseball equipment, so I could have all of these things that my father didn't get when he was a child. And in his mind, I'm going to give my son more than I had when I was young, so he has a better opportunity at being successful. I didn't know it, and my father didn't know it at that time. What was more important to me than the Michael Jordan shoes was getting to watch my father come through those doors. By watching my father come through those doors, it would validate my experience and my abilities and who I was as a person. It would help me feel secure in a world when starting in middle school, it starts to get confusing for human beings. You start thinking about things, the emotions become more real. My father had the ability to ground me as a human being. I was looking for this experience with my father, but what I tell people is I felt like I was in a boxing ring. I was in a boxing ring and I was with an opponent who was literally beating the snot out of me. The bell would ring, and in between rounds, I would go back and I would take a seat. I would look across the ring and I would see that my opponent had a team of people that were around them. They had somebody giving them water, somebody icing their face, a coach instructing them for what they were seeing in the match. And myself, I went back alone, confused. Why I was getting beat up, why this opponent wanted to beat me up the way they did, and why it seemed like everybody else had a team, but I didn't. And I made a decision. If my dad doesn't care, why should I? When I was a young kid, they said, stay away from kids who smoke weed and drink. Back then, that's what it was. Stay away from kids who smoke weed and drink. Bad kids make bad decisions. Stay away from them. In 2017, I was about to give a keynote speech at a national conference on addiction and mental health. I was given a flyer before I took the stage, and on this flyer was a bunch of statistics. One of the statistics on there was for youth. It said that 68% of kids who use mind-altering substances, including nicotine products, before the age of 14, 68% of them have been sexually abused. When I learned this, I started to travel back to my young years, and I started to think about all of the young lives that were labeled bad people and why they were labeled bad people and the truth behind what they were doing. The truth is, any individual, human being, that experiences uncomfortable emotions wants them to stop. Every one of us that are listening right now, when they experience anxiety, you want it to stop. When somebody close to you suddenly dies, the anxiety that comes from the grief process, the anguish that comes from the grief process, we just want it to stop. A young life who's the recipient of sexual abuse experiences mass confusion, shame, and guilt, and these extremely burdensome emotions. They're confused about why this is happening. They're scared about when it's going to happen again. They're trying to stop or regulate themselves to get to a place where they feel safe about the experience that they're having. They're introduced to a substance. The substance then appears to give them some type of security or safety from these uncomfortable emotions. And they then believe that these substances are actually the pathway to healing. When in reality, it's not the pathway to healing, it's the pathway to self-limiting behaviors that over time will take the things that they value. At 12 years old, I had no idea that while I wasn't sexually abused, I was being emotionally neglected. The emotional neglect created uncomfortable emotions. And in that time, I did not have the skills to identify, one, the emotions I was feeling, and two, the ability to process these emotions, and three, believe that even in uncomfortableness, I was safe. And the reason that I didn't have this was because my parents were absent from my childhood. I was not somebody that got to sit down with my parents and them teach me how to use my words to talk about how I felt, how to understand that I may feel anxiety, I may feel fear and doubt and rejection or abandonment. And though while I may feel these, I was still safe and I was still going to be okay. It was just important for me to talk about this experience. And then as I talked about it, I could use positive coping skills that were empowering to self, that would bring in the healing process and help me create the storyline that says I can, I will, and I'm able. My storyline at 12 years old was I can't, I won't, and I'll never be able. The reason that this part of my story is so important is because the current infrastructure, the majority of infrastructure in the United States, will take young lives who struggle in a classroom, who struggle in a school environment, and the immediate answer is to kick them out of school. By removing this individual from school, we then perpetuate the story that they have begun to create about themselves, that there's something wrong with them, that they're never going to be able to connect with their other peers, and they begin the process of the self-limiting or self-destructive behaviors. The answer is connecting these individuals and making sure that we're creating programs that meet kids where they're at right now. One of the things that I always say is, every school in the United States has an opportunity for kids to engage in classical music, which means they can play a saxophone, a trombone, a cello, the piano, a flute. There was 540 billion hip hop streams in the United States last year. Drake's Hotline Bling has 1 billion views on YouTube alone. Of all the streams in the world, classical music accounts for 0.02. And yet schools have not evolved in offering more in terms of the artistic form of creating music. I always say, why are there not studios on campus? Why are we not creating studios on campuses where kids can learn to create electronic dance music or hip hop music? By not having these forms of music available at schools, we're missing an opportunity to connect with kids who may not want to be saxophone players or play the pianos. They may not want to be football stars or baseball stars or be involved in these types of things. Hip hop music is such an immersive part of the United States culture nowadays. We can sit out on our most populated street corner for an hour and we'll listen to people playing hip hop music over and over and over and over again. I will almost bet you won't hear one car in an hour that's playing classical music. The reason that this is important is because when I started my nonprofit organization, the Free Will Project, what I wanted to do was challenge the infrastructure by saying, hey, we have all of these programs that we've been offering kids for all this time, but the X Games is one of the most watched sporting events in the world on TV. Why don't we bring action sports as an after-school program? Action sports is my shtick, right? That's what I do. So I'll challenge the infrastructure and say, I want to connect kids through a like-minded activity that's empowering for self and others through action sports. So I created the Free Will Project. The goal behind the Free Will Project was to get kids who were not interested in other programs. And when I got these kids that were not interested in other programs, I was able to bring them around a mentoring program that could give them an experience that would help them feel I can, I will, and I'm able. Right now in the United States, what we're doing with programs, especially with troubled youth that are experiencing some struggles that make it harder for them to perform in an institutional setting in their early life, is we try to say, here you are with your school, here we are with our program. We need you to go from here to over here. The problem is everybody else is over here. What are we really telling them? Something's wrong with you. You need to be fixed before you can go back over here. The infrastructure is set up in a way that we're not actually bridging the gap to the best ability that we can. Whereas if we injected what we have over here to here, and we used like-minded activities to connect this individual, and while they were connected with their peers, we created a community in which other youth became vulnerable about their life. We may find out that many other students, the ones who show up to class and get straight A's, the prettiest girls, the best sports star males, they're actually going through a lot of stuff too. And that through community and vulnerability and offering services in a way that connects everybody together, we can then see we're more alike than we are different. And through community and connection in this way, we can then change the story that individuals feel about themselves from I can't, I won't, and I'll never be able, to I can, I will, and I am able. So I created an after-school program called BARS, Behavioral and Academic Restoration Through Action Sports. I was introduced to a kid named Branny, who I was told was one of the top 5 worst students on the campus. And that if we could do something with this young man, it would speak volumes about what this program was able to do. When I met Branny, he had a 0.7 GPA. I remember telling Branny, you have to try to get a 0.7 GPA, bro. Like, you're just literally not putting your PE clothes on. That is a choice and an effort that you're making for your grades to be like this. I said, let me help you. Are you willing to let me help you? The incentive for these young men and women, a part of our program, was that if they graduated, they would be given their own bicycle, a helmet, and a lock that would enable them to continue to be a part of the program that helped reshape their belief system about themselves. I wasn't sure that this bicycle was going to be a strong enough incentive for a young individual growing up in one of the poor zip codes in the United States, where helicopters, gunshots, homeless individuals, gangs, violence, and drugs were the order of the day. But he looked at me and he said, okay. I was shocked. And I said, what class do you want to start with? He said, let's start with my English class. I said, all right, every day before the program, we're going to sit down, we're going to work on your English class. Within 6 months, he went from a 0.7 GPA to a 2.7. The following year had a 4.0. I will never forget the day that he came in and he brought me his first test. It was almost like I was his father. And he was showing me this test. And he was so proud of what he had done. Look, Tony, I got an A. Look, Tony, I got an A. These moments were what helped me realize that it's through like-minded activities in which we connect all kids together, not segregate, not take them away, not offer them services away from the other kids, but find a way to provide program and resources with other kids that they wouldn't even know that they're changing. They wouldn't even realize that they're learning because they're just enjoying their childhood. They're just having an experience that makes them feel good about life. We have to be pioneers in coming up with new creative ways to connect youth. We have to recognize that many of the programs that schools are offering are out of date. Every school allows a kid to have a pencil, a pad, and a camera and a recording device. What are they doing? They're beginning their life in journalism. Very few schools have TikTok programs. It blows my mind. The schools will say, well, kids don't engage with our social media. Well, of course they don't, because you're letting some old teacher, no offense, take a photo, post a picture, and have some caption on there. Nobody cares about that. That's not the way kids are engaging with social media. We have opportunities to create social media journalism programs where these kids that are very creative by nature have the ability to start creating reels and TikTok videos at football games, at cheer competitions, at baseball competitions, at band competitions, and they can create the social media that other kids want to engage in. While they're doing this, we make sure that we're mentoring individuals in a way that is empowering to self and others and gives them that belief system, I can, I will, and I'm able. We're missing the mark though. We need to do better. And for me, at 12 years old, the only thing I had was basketball. But I made a decision. If my dad doesn't care, then I don't. Shortly after that, I was kicked out of 7th grade for selling weed to a girl. I wasn't getting validation at home, so I tried to get validated by my peers at school in a very self-limiting and unhealthy way. I got this girl some weed. She got caught with it. When she got caught with it, I got kicked out of 7th grade for selling weed. And I found a BMX bicycle shortly after this. My parents started taking me out to the BMX track where my brother was. My brother was already racing at this time. And my dad says, while I'm out there, why don't you try racing BMX? I said, okay. So I went out to the BMX track and I'm starting to race BMX. I'm 12 years old. By the time I'm 18, I'm on the cover of the largest BMX racing magazine in the world. I'm ranked #1 in the country in points. I'm sponsored by Fox Racing, Airwalk Shoes, Spy Sunglasses. Companies that weren't sponsoring amateur athletes were sponsoring me because they believed that when I turned pro, I would be one of the best professionals in the sport. But most people that would have said, don't worry about Hoff, he's going to go off and race BMX and be super successful, they had no idea that when I took my helmet off, I wanted to kill myself. When I took my helmet off, I had social anxiety issues. When I took my helmet off, I had depression issues. I had my depression issues my senior year were probably the worst that they had ever been. I had Saturday school every single week. My English teacher would tell you that Tony didn't come to first period because he's a punk. That's the way it was when I grew up. Everything was black and white. She had no idea that the first coping skill I had developed for myself to cope with these mental health struggles was to just sleep. If I was asleep, I didn't feel anxiety. If I was asleep, I didn't have depression. If I was asleep, I didn't want to kill myself. So when I woke up before school, most of the time I would force myself to go back to sleep. And the reason I was trying to go back to sleep was so I didn't have to feel the self-hatred that I was feeling. Most people think that all you got to do is have some type of success and all of these things. And if you have all that, there's no way that you could experience what I was experiencing in my life. My peers had no idea that even though I was on the cover of a magazine and had corporate endorsements my senior year in high school, that I was absolutely dying on the inside. And I was dying on the inside because I was not in a place where I could process my childhood, my experiences with my father, and I was not in a place where I could see myself in the things that I was doing and commit to an inward journey. And as I committed to this inward journey, I would process these events and get to a place where I loved who I was, and I would accept the emotions that come with my life and not allow them to control me anymore, because I would use coping skills that were empowering. At 18 years old, I also didn't want to race BMX, because I thought life was all about making a lot of money. If I just had a lot of money, a big bank account, a good looking wife, a big house, that all of the problems that I was going to have were going to go away. And so while my social anxiety was controlling most of my life, I isolated away from my peers. I spent most of my time in my bedroom building computers, selling computers, and buying more computers to learn how to build corporate computer networks. My goal to make a lot of money was to work for a big corporation and manage their network. I believed that if I could get that position, I, one, could make a lot of money, and two, would have to interact with very few human beings face to face, which my social anxiety didn't want me to do, because I would be locked in a closet with a computer and I would just email everybody else and I would make sure that their network worked. I got offered $120,000 a year my senior year in high school, 6 months before I graduated high school, to go work for a guy who was Entrepreneur of the Year of California at 23 years old. He was known for starting $1 million tech companies. My aunt knew his wife, who connected me with her husband, and he told me he was inventing these 802.11b wireless internet radios. He said he was going to be the first person in the United States to offer wireless internet by putting these internet radios on towers outside of the neighborhood and beamed it into these rich neighborhoods of Rancho Santa Fe, California, where all the beaches are down in San Diego. He interviewed me and offered me the job and said, as soon as you finish high school, I need you to move down here to take this job. When I knew that I was going to get this job, I put my gift away. My gift was racing my bicycle. My gift was one of two things that every human being needs to keep their mental wellness balanced. One is a safe place to have a conversation, which I didn't have. My parents were very emotionally unavailable. The second thing a person needs is a activity that connects you with like-minded individuals. The catch is it has to be empowering for self and others. That was my bicycle. When I put my bicycle away, the only thing I had was this, and the conversations I had with myself. And the conversations I had with myself were always self-limiting. They were self-destructive. They believed I was different. I felt misunderstood, and always came up with the answer, I can't, I won't, and I'll never be able. When I put my gift away, the emotional pressure that I began to experience would multiply because I no longer had a bicycle helping me release that emotional pressure. Like I said, when I had my helmet on, I didn't feel like I was going to kill myself. When I had my helmet on, I didn't feel depression or anxiety. Every single one of us right now listening have likely found something in our lives that we can enjoy that takes us away the pains and the sufferings of parts of life. And those are gifts to us. We enjoy the things that we enjoy that are unique to ourselves. And I truly believe that those are gifts to ourselves to help us work through life. When we give up on those gifts, we find ourselves in a place of discontention. But not only do we need to have these activities, we need to have this connection with peers. And when you have those two together, there is a power that can overcome every type of life situation and bring you to a place where you're always empowered and something good comes from whatever situation it is that you're in. When I lost that, the emotional pressure reached a point where while I was going to these parties and telling people I would never smoke weed and I would never drink because I'm going to go make six figures down in San Diego, I started to hate myself even more because when I went to parties, I watched everybody else look like they were having a good time while I stood against the wall as a result of my social anxiety and wondered the whole time, what's wrong with me? Why am I not like everybody else? So I said, I'll try it. Told my friend I want to smoke weed. It's just going to be one time. I smoked weed for the first time. I couldn't stop laughing, thought I was having a good time. It didn't help my anxiety. It didn't help my depression. It didn't seem to balance me out or make me feel like I was okay, but it did connect me with my peers. It just wasn't empowering for self or others. And so I told myself, I'll just smoke once a month. Well, the next weekend came by, my friends circled up at a party. They said, Hoff, you want to smoke? I said, yeah, I'll smoke. But I told myself, I don't want to smoke weed every single day like my friends do. Maybe I'll just smoke on the weekends. Wednesday comes by, I'm at my buddy Tone's house. We're playing on the Xbox. My friends started smoking. They said, Hoff, you want to smoke? I said, yeah, I'll smoke. Next thing you know, I'm smoking weed every single day, just like my friends do. And what we didn't understand at 18 years old was that there was a doorway that existed. And you couldn't see this door because it was invisible. But when you walked through this door and you stepped all the way through, you didn't get to just turn around and walk back out because you thought you were done. That's not the way it works. I've only seen people get out of the door two different ways. One is the way 16 of my friends, 15 of them that I went to school with, have gotten back through the other side of the door. Unfortunately, from drug overdoses. They lost their lives to opioid overdoses. The only other way that I've seen people get out of this door is to change 6 things about themselves. The way they think, the way they talk, the way they walk, the places they go, the friends they have, and the things they do. If you can change those 6 things or work on the process of changing those 6 things, you will find yourself freed from active addiction. It's possible. People are doing it all the time. The hard thing is when you walk through the door, you're hit with denial and you don't realize that there's a problem. And I'll explain those mechanics of how it worked in my life. Every single one of us were actually walking through the door, not for a good time, but to escape these emotional burdens that we hadn't talked about yet in our lifetime. My friend Yoshi was gay. He grew up in a conservative community where, talking about his identity, he believed his parents would cut him off and his friends would no longer want to talk to him. So he was afraid to talk about his identity. And as a result, he experienced emotional pressure that drove him through the door to try and escape from it. My friend Jeff, his mother and father got divorced when they were a young kid, and his dad disappeared. He never saw him again. His mother began to have a lot of boyfriends. He then started to believe that these men who were with his mother were more important to his mother than he was. He developed the self-same image and belief system I did as a result of my emotional abandonment with my father, as he did, and he got it from his mom's emotional neglect and these men that she would bring around. Every single one of us, Adam, was sexually abused as a child and physically abused as a child. He didn't talk about it till he was in his 30s. He didn't find sobriety until he was willing to talk about this sexual abuse that occurred in his life and how that made him feel like he was less of a man and believed that he couldn't, he won't, and he'll never be able to eat as well. Every single one of us were walking through the door, not for a good time, but for something that we weren't talking about yet in our lives. I was just smoking weed every single day is what I told myself. It's not that big of a deal. I went down to San Diego after I graduated high school, and I went to take this computer job. Well, it turned out the guy ended up being wanted by the FBI. He was wanted for stealing millions of dollars, and I didn't find this out for many years later. Well, when the job wasn't working out because he was a Ponzi scheme scam artist, I decided I would quit and I would go back home to Fresno, Clovis little city I grew up in. And I started going to parties again with my friends. And one day my friend called me and said, "Hey, I got this pill. We need to try this pill." I said, "What is it?" He said, "It's called Oxycontin." I said, "What's that?" He said, "I don't know. The guy we buy our Vicodin from, he's out. He's got this new painkiller called Oxycontin." He said, "It's like Vicodin on steroids. You want to split one with me?" I said, "Yeah, I'll split it with you. It comes from a doctor. It's got to be safe." Then I found out sometimes the stuff that comes out of the orange bottle is no different than the stuff that comes from the cartel. It's just packaged different. The interesting thing about Oxycontin was that when I tried Oxycontin, instantly, my anxiety went away, my depression went away, my suicidal thoughts went away. And for the first time in my teenage and early adult life, I felt safe. I felt like everything was okay. There's no more chaos. There's no more confusion. I have energy. I feel loved. I love how I feel, which makes me believe I love who I am. I thought to myself, I'm fixed. You mean to tell me all I had to do was take this pill, half of this pill, and it all goes away? I'm fixed. When I say that addiction is a choice, I give people half credit because we have to choose to walk through the door. What happens when we walk through the door, though, is not a choice. My goal wasn't to become homeless. My goal wasn't to lose my family, lose my friends, lose my freedom, commit crimes. My goal was simply to regulate the emotions that made me feel like something was wrong with myself. And then scientifically, something is different about me when I use substances that change the way that I feel. My brain doesn't turn off. I don't want it to be that way. I remember I used to tell this story about this lady when I was on a plane. And, I fly so much, my status gets me into first class. I don't have to buy first class tickets. Most of the time, my status will get me upgraded if there's a seat available. This lady behind me was drinking wine. She had a glass of wine, and the flight attendant came up after she had finished, and she said, do you want another glass? And she said, no. And I thought to myself, how does she do that? Like, my brain doesn't work that way. My brain thinks, okay, I'll have one and I'll finish this one in a hurry so I can get to the second one. And then when the second one's done, I can't wait for the third one, and then the fourth, and then the fifth, and then the sixth. And then finally, I'm at a place where all of my emotions have been completely shut off by these substances. And my brain wants me to go there. My brain believes that I am only safe when I shut off all of the emotions that come with life. But the only thing that could do that for me was Oxycontin, was opioids. So when I found this substance, I thought to myself, the doctors that are prescribing me these SSRIs, Zoloft, Paxil, Prozac, these mood stabilizers, Zyprexa, lithium, Wellbutrin, they don't work. They take my life away from me. Oxycontin makes me have energy. It takes away my anxiety. I don't feel depressed. I love who I am. I can fix this myself. So that's what I tried to do. Just take Oxycontin, because Oxycontin was the only thing that worked. And then I found out that Oxycontin was no different than heroin. When you stop using Oxycontin, you go through the same withdrawals that you go through when you stop using heroin or fentanyl. It's like the worst flu times 100. And that worst flu times 100 is so painful, so powerful. I don't care who you are. I have seen every type of person completely change who they are to stop withdrawals from happening in their life. At 21 years old, I made the worst decision in my life. I was living with some friends that I went to high school with. My parents removed me from the house. They found a bunch of weed in my backpack when I came home from San Diego at 18 years old and kicked me out of the house. So I lived with some kids that I went to high school with. We were going through the withdrawals, and we made a decision one morning in 2004 that we would arm ourselves with guns, and we would go to one of our best friend's mother's house. We would break into her house while she was there, hold her at gunpoint, and steal the Oxycontin medication that was in her house. She had multiple sclerosis. She was getting prescribed thousands of these pills, and my friend started selling them to us, not realizing at the time that what we were purchasing was pharmaceutical grade heroin. And all of us were becoming pharmaceutical opioid heroin addicts. And when she caught him, she started locking him up. And we couldn't get them from him anymore. And at this time in the early 2000s, where I was from, there wasn't enough people that were selling their Oxycontin prescriptions. So we would go through these droughts, and the pharmacies would run out because the company wasn't producing enough of these either. If you've seen the Dope Sick series on Hulu, then you know that the company started ramping up how many pills they were producing when they started to realize that they were onto something with getting doctors to prescribe these pills. So while this was happening, we were going through these withdrawals that absolutely control every person's behavior because it's so gut-wrenchingly painful. It makes you become willing to do whatever it takes. And I knew when I left that house that I made the biggest mistake of my entire life. And I told myself, I'll never rob somebody ever again. I can't deal with this shame and this guilt and this voice that said you made the biggest mistake your entire life. You're going to pay for this. That voice was so loud, I didn't do it ever again, but my co-defendants couldn't stop doing it. They kept robbing people and eventually ended up on the news when they got caught. The lady that we robbed saw my co-defendant on TV and said, that guy was in my house. Started an investigation around all my friends. 6 months later, the cops found out where I was staying at, and they raided the place and they took me to jail. I hadn't seen my family in 3 years, no conversations on the phone, no Christmas dinner, no Thanksgiving, nothing. I called my dad from Fresno County Jail and I said, Dad, I'm in jail for armed robbery. Can you help me? And my dad said, I'm not helping you. This is your problem. You need to fix it yourself. What do you want me to do? I said, can you get me an attorney, please? And my dad says, I don't know who to get. I said, can you look this guy, Michael Idiard, up? He's supposed to be one of the best defense attorneys. These guys that I run with that are selling drugs, they use this guy, and if they get in trouble, they're not going to prison. Can you just look him up? Called my dad the next day, and my dad said, son, this guy wants $30,000 to walk into a courtroom one time. We don't got that kind of money. But he said, your father and I, or your mother and I have had a conversation though, and we're going to pull the money out of my retirement. We're going to get you this attorney, and hopefully he keeps you out of prison. I can get my son back, and you can get your life back. My dad thought that drug addiction was a choice. He believed that if he threw money at this doorway, that it would pull me back through the other side, and I would wake up to this fact that 17 and a half years in prison for armed robbery was not as fun as what these drugs were making me think I was having. When in reality, he had no idea that the drugs had completely taken over the way my brain functioned, and that I was trying to escape from this misery that I was feeling. And that until I was ready to commit to those 6 things and changing those, that I would be stuck on the other side of the doorway. So my dad, he got me Michael Idiart. I went to court with this. I went to court with a co-defendant whose dad was a lead robbery squad detective of the Fresno PD. At that time, they didn't want to lock the cops up. They didn't want to lock the cops' kids up either. And so I went to court with some advantages that I found out other people don't have advantages. And it wasn't their choice, just like it wasn't my choice. But the way it worked out for me was I had a pretty good advantage. And that was this and one of the best defense attorneys in town. And my co-defendant's dad was a cop. So they said, we don't want to give these guys prison. We want to give them an opportunity. Which, when this happened, I started to think to myself, wait a minute, I get to go home after committing armed robbery with 5 years felony probation, 90 days in a treatment center, and 5 months in the county jail. But my friend back in the cell, Tudabug, he has to go to prison for 17 years. Now, he's an 18-year-old young black male who grew up on the other side of town, who had a scholarship opportunity for football. He was picked up from football practice. I read all the police reports. The 2 people that picked him up were in their mid to late 20s. They even said that he had nothing to do with this. They picked him up from football practice like they did every single day. But this day that they picked him up, they were in the middle of a kidnap robbery. The judge told him, because he didn't get out of the car, that he needed to go to prison for 17 years. And I thought to myself, I remember I called my dad. I said, Dad, this doesn't make any sense. I didn't understand it. I went to school with like 10 black folks. We didn't talk about any of this stuff. We didn't share experiences with each other so we could try and learn and understand and evolve and be better about certain things. These were very taboo topics. My experience and understanding came from my own experience of how I had to go through situations and see what other people were also experiencing, and how that same experience would treat me different than somebody else because my parents spent money and I had a different color skin and came from a different side of town. Because the reality is, Tudabug grew up on Strother Street, known for Crip gang members. The 2 people that picked him up were also 2 Crip gang members. By sending him to prison for 17 years, the way the system works, or the infrastructure works, is it's we'll get rid of him now and not have to deal with him later, because he is going to be a Crip gang member or is a Crip gang member. We just can't validate him yet. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to get this opportunity for me to have a different life, then I need to do it for myself, and I need to do it for Tuda and others that are like Tuda. But I didn't realize I even had a problem. I thought that I could just have 10 years of prison time hanging over my head, because when the judge sentenced me, he said, Mr. Hoffman, if you come back in my courtroom for anything, I'm going to give you all 10 years that I'm supposed to be giving you right now. Do you understand me? I said, yes, sir. In my mind, those 10 years were enough for me to stop. But it wasn't. I got out. 30 days later, I started going to parties. I was drinking. I told myself, I don't have a drinking problem. I have a drug problem. But drinking for me is no different than drugs. Trying to escape from this misery that I feel with my emotions. I got in a fight at this party one night and I knocked the guy's tooth out. 2 weeks later, I almost had to have my hand cut off in surgery. I couldn't clench a fist, couldn't bend my elbow, couldn't rotate my arm. I didn't know what was happening. So I drove to the hospital in the middle of the night. The triage nurse sees me and she says, oh my God, you should have been in surgery days ago. And I said, why? She goes, look at your arm. It's fire engine right up to your bicep. You have an infection in your knuckle that's almost up to your shoulder. It's shutting your entire arm down. She's like, we might have to cut your hand off. She goes, why didn't you come in sooner? I said, I don't know. I thought it was going to go away. So they rushed me into the back of the room. They got to call a surgeon in the middle of the night. And a nurse comes into this room and she says, Mr. Hoffman, I'm going to administer a drug called fentanyl for the pain. I said, okay. I didn't know what fentanyl was at that time. And as soon as she gave it to me, I felt that again. Alcohol wasn't doing that for me. I was still chasing after it. My behaviors were chasing after it. The fentanyl, when she gave it to me, I knew exactly what it was. They went through the surgery. They cut the infection out of my hand. They sent me home with a Vicodin prescription. And my mom said, I'm going to give you this Vicodin 1 pill every 4 hours, like the bottle says, because you're a drug addict and you can't follow instructions. My mom also thought that drug addiction was a choice. She simply thought that I was a knucklehead. The bottle says 1 pill every 4 hours. Tony just wants to know what it's like when you take 4 pills at once. The reality was the addiction had started and kick-started into high gear once they gave me the fentanyl again. And my brain said that I need this drug to feel safe. If I don't feel safe, I'm not okay. So wait for your mom to leave the keys out. When she leaves the keys out, steal them, get them, and leave. 3 nights later, that's exactly what happened. My mom left the keys out to the closet she locked them up in. I grabbed them in the middle of the night, got the Vicodin prescription, and I walked out on my family for 2.5 years. Over the course of this 2.5 years, the addiction would exponentially become different than what it was before. It was no longer Oxycontin because I couldn't afford them. It was using heroin, crack cocaine, methamphetamines, always with the needle. Once I was introduced to the needle, it was like I could knock myself out. I could put myself to sleep. Not real sleep, but I could hit myself with such a powerful high that in that moment, it would be like putting myself to sleep. And that was the greatest feeling to me, because if I was asleep, I didn't hate who I was. The only thing is that it was very clear at this time, what I was doing was a suicide mission. What my brain made me believe was fixing me was killing me. And I couldn't even see it. I started losing all my friends. They didn't want to be around me anymore. My best friend, Nathan, was my last friend that I had. He always gave me a place to stay and food to eat. I remember I walked to his house one night because I needed a place to stay. I knocked on the door. His dad answered and he said, "Mijo, you can't stay here anymore." I said, "What do you mean, Alex?" He said, "Mijo, somebody called me and told me you're stealing credit cards. You need to get your life together." I said, "Alex, I'm not stealing credit cards." I really wasn't. I said, "Can I talk to Nate?" He said, "Yeah, Nate's in his room." So I walked into Nate's room. I said, "Hey, bro, I need a sleeping bag." He said, "Why, Hoff?" I said, "Bro, I'm sleeping on the street tonight." He said, "Hoff, call somebody. Get your phone out and call somebody, man." I said, "Bro, I've been calling people all night, bro. I got a prepaid phone. I'm running out of minutes. Please, just give me a sleeping bag." He said, "Fine, Hoff, I'll give you a sleeping bag." I'm about to go sleep at Clovis High School, the high school I graduated from in 2002, in the baseball stadium under the announcer's tower because it was raining and I needed a place to stay dry. I walked out of his house. I made a left towards the high school. He lived 150 yards from the tennis courts. I get below the street light outside his house and I hear his voice, "Hoff." And I turned around and I looked at him. I said, "Yeah." He said, "Look at yourself, bro. What are you doing?" I said, "Don't worry about it, Nate. I got it." I'm about to sleep on the street for the first night, and I still can't see it. The denial from addiction is so deadly. I couldn't even see it. I still, in my mind, believed, which turned out to be a good thing to some degree, that it's okay. But not that I could change my life the way it's changed now. It's just that I can stop when I'm ready. I can stop when I want to. I don't really have a problem. I was unwilling to let go of the belief system. I was unwilling to let go of my thinking. I was unwilling to see a different perspective in life, because the addiction was so powerful. It made me believe that I would not be safe if I did not have heroin, meth, cocaine, crack cocaine. For the next 6 months, I slept on the street, behind dumpsters so people couldn't find me, in dirt fields so people couldn't find me. I had never felt so much emotional turmoil, so much shame, so much guilt. When I started putting needles in my arm, I knew I was in trouble. I knew it. I knew I was going to die soon. My only plan, one of my last plans to try and fix things, was to sleep on my parents' porch, to wait for my parents to come home from work and to beg them to help me. So I walked to my parents' house. I slept on their porch. As they got home from work, they go together. They've worked in the same office all their lives that they've been together. They didn't even pull the car in the driveway. My dad stopped in the street. He got out of the car, excuse my language. He said, "Get the fuck off my porch. You belong in prison." So the only thing that I'm going to do for you right now is give you a head start if you don't want to go to prison today. I'm calling the cops. I just ran. I don't know. I felt so confused for so much of my life. You know, I never understood my parents, their emotional neglect, how they operated. It always made me feel like there was something wrong with me. And that moment was crushing for me because I really I wanted something different. I just didn't know how to get it. And my parents, no fault to them, you know, they were going to these damn Nar-Anon meetings that were saying, kick him out, stop talking to him. You need to cut him off. He'll learn his lesson when he hits rock bottom. And it was the stupidest advice that they were ever given. Because what I did need was people who understood the difference between enablement and disconnecting with love. They could disconnect, but also reach out to me, right? They could say, "Son, we haven't seen you in so long. We love you and we miss you. If you ever want to get help, your family will help you find what it is that you need to change what's happening in your life." They were told, don't answer the phone. Tell him that if he doesn't have 6 months of sobriety, he cannot be a part of the family. I don't know how to do that. Like, I don't know how to do that. My friend's family, they paid for me to get on a bus, not a plane, a bus. I rode a bus 13 hours to Oregon while on felony probation, risking absconding from probation, because they were going to give me an opportunity to get sober and manage a ranch of 300 acres of wine grapes and start my life over up there. Get me away from Fresno and the town that was destructive for me. I got there. In 7 days, I just tried to steal their tractor. This is God honest truth, but it was this old tractor that like you had to pump things and turn the key before it would start. I'm like trying to steal their tractor in the morning. I can't figure out how to steal it. So I walk to the end of the street down this long rocky driveway. I get to the end of the street. It's a Sunday morning, and this guy in a Toyota pickup, a green one, pulls up. He stops the car and he says, "Where are you going?" I said, "The bus station. Can you take me there?" He says, "I'll do my first good deed of the day right now. Hop in." I get to the bus station. I'm calling my friends and people I know. I need money for a bus ticket to get back to California. Nobody would do it. They said, "Hoff, you need to be there. You need this." When the bus driver walked into the Greyhound bus station, I walked onto the bus, and I found myself back in California 13 hours later. I wanted to change. I just couldn't control what was happening to me when I stopped. On January 21st, 2007, I had a spiritual experience. It changed my life. It's the only reason I'm alive. It's the only reason why I'm doing what I'm doing today. On January 21st, 2007, I broke into a house that was up for rent. On January 22nd, I woke up at 2 p.m. with 4 cops in the room with their guns drawn on me. They arrested me, violated my felony probation, and 30 days later, I was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. When I got to prison, I was at Wasco State Prison to start. I had cell 254 on the top bunk. I remember I walked into the cell block about 10 p.m. I walked up the staircase and cut across the tier, opened up my cell, closed it behind me, started making my bed. After I was done making my bed, I jumped up on my bunk and I laid down and I looked up in the ceiling. As I was looking up in the ceiling, there were these quotes that people had written with pencils. One of the quotes I started to read said, "Be careful what you think, because your thoughts become your words. Be careful what you say, because your words become your actions. Be careful what you do, because your actions become your habits. Be careful what you make a habit, because your habits become your character, and your character becomes your destiny." I kept reading it over and over and over. It made so much sense to me. For the first time in my life, I was reading something and thinking to myself, this is how it works. And I thought to myself, if this is the blueprint of how I ended up in here, then I can use this quote to re-engineer my entire life and get out of here and never come back and do something great. So I set 4 goals in an 8x12. I said, when I get out of here, I'm going to race BMX professionally. When I get out of here, I'm going to go to the Olympics. When I get out of here, I'm going to start a nonprofit organization called the Free Will Project. And when I get out of here, I'm going to become a professional speaker. But I didn't know how I was going to go from a prison cell to the Olympics, because at that time, there'd never been a human being that started in a prison cell and made it to the Olympics. But I started reading through this really big book. And as I was reading through this really big book, there came this verse that said, those who can be trusted with little will be trusted with much. And I thought to myself, what does that mean for me? What it meant for me was I couldn't brush my teeth every single day at 23 years old in a California penitentiary cell. If I can't brush my teeth every single day, how would I ever make it to the Olympics? And so I started to realize that this process of achievement, this process of fulfillment, this process of abundance started with these really small, insignificant things. And now anybody can brush their teeth every single day. There's a catch. The catch is, while we're doing these really insignificant things, we have to assign a very direct intention. Why am I brushing my teeth every single day? Where is it taking me? I started brushing my teeth every single day, treating it exactly the way I would treat going to the Olympics. But as I brushed my teeth, I told myself it's not to stop cavities, it's because I'm going to the Olympics. Then after I learned how to brush my teeth every single day, I learned how to make my bed. While I was making my bed, I was telling myself I'm going to the Olympics. Making my bed felt like I was at the Olympics. Then I learned how to organize my stuff. Then I learned how to discipline myself. The ability to do good work when I didn't want to do good work at all. I started to learn these life skills that I had never had in my life that I was going to need for me to get to the Olympics. And if it all came down to those who are trusted with little will be trusted with much. Then I started asking myself a question I'd never asked myself my entire life. It is still the cornerstone question that has become one of the most enlightening things that I've ever done. Why do I feel this way? And why every time do I feel this, do I behave this way? The question of wondering why I felt the way I felt and where that feeling came from opened up the door and led me down a pathway of self-awareness. I started to teach myself the things that my parents missed in my childhood. It's not my parents' fault. It's no parent's fault. We do the best that we can. The addiction part is completely out of our control. But I never understood how I felt. I had to have a feelings wheel for several years with my therapist. I felt like a 6-year-old pinning things on a board, looking at feelings wheels and identifying the feeling that I had so I could understand the behavior that came with the feeling. Once I was able to become more aware of myself and my emotions, I was then able to have a better understanding of the behaviors that came with them. I could then work on coping skills that could take me from emotions that made me feel unsafe and work these coping skills in to make me feel safe and understand that even though I don't feel it, I am safe. By the time I left prison, I was a completely different person. I get out on December 13th, December 15th, I see my parole agent. He says, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to race my bike professionally. I brought you the cover of the magazine that I was on when I was 18 years old. I promise you, Mr. Mason, I can ride a bicycle and that this isn't a joke. I'm going to train for the Olympics and I want to start a nonprofit organization for kids at some point, and I'd like to start telling my story. He said, who brought you here? I said, my mom did. He said, where is she? I said, in the car. He said, go get her. So I walked out to the car. I said, Mom, the parole agent wants you to come inside. And she's like, are you serious, Anthony? I said, yeah, Mom, come on, let's go. My mom has been to every principal's office in my entire life. And now she gets to meet my parole agent. And when she walks in, he says, ma'am, do you know what your son's telling me he's going to do? She says, you talking about him riding his bicycle? He says, oh, yeah. He says he's going to the Olympics, too. And that he's going to start a program for kids And he's going to start telling a story. And my mom said, that's what he's been talking about since he's been in prison. And he said, ma'am, your son's full of shit. He said, I brought you in here so I could tell you to your face that your son will be back in prison in 30 days. I'll be the one that arrests him. And it's going to be you and your husband's fault for being stupid enough to believe this story. You know, these are the stigmas when we talk about stigma. I'm friends with Mason now. It's really not so much how he communicated to me, in my opinion, as much as the infrastructure taught him to communicate that way. There was no programs when I went to prison. We didn't have access to mental health care. You know how many people that I was in prison with didn't go home to mom and dad? And if they went home to mom and dad, dad's been hustling, mom's a prostitute, everybody on the streets selling drugs, gangs. There's no stability. There was nothing in prison when I was in there that helped rehabilitate anybody. It was the idea that if we put a person in a chair and sit them in the corner for a certain amount of time, that they'll actually think about the consequences that came with their actions, and they'll just change who they are. It doesn't work that way. The 93% was the recidivism rate when I met with Agent Mason. The infrastructure that he worked for didn't teach him about communication. It didn't teach him about social structures, neighborhoods, and why people behaved the way they did. He didn't care. His job was to arrest people that could not perform the way parole said that you were supposed to perform. And so when I told him what I was going to do, instead of saying, you know, Tony, I've never heard these types of goals from an inmate personally, it scares me because they're extremely zealous. And my worry is that if these things don't work out, you're going to result to old behaviors, and then I will have to rearrest you. So what can I do? Because clearly you can ride a bicycle according to the cover of this magazine. What can I do to help you that if things don't work out, you don't go back to your old ways? Because I don't want to rearrest you. That simple shift in conversation would have taken him from a place of judgment and casting shame and fear onto somebody to empowerment. It would have made me feel heard and seen and known that there was a person that could provide some type of help to me if I needed it. Instead, he chose to speak from a place of fear. The infrastructure allowed it. And unfortunately for him, he was standing next to one extremely stubborn person. Fortunately for me, that stubbornness served me in this moment because I, in my head, said, this guy is about to witness some really crazy stuff. 5 months later, I raced my first professional BMX race I'd ever raced in my life. I hadn't touched a bike in 7 years. I took third place. That first year, I won 5 races at the lower pro division. 1 year after being back on my bicycle, I was invited to the Olympic Training Center by the United States of America. 1 year after being back on my bicycle, I made it to the Olympic level of racing BMX. I made 6 finals my first year. I picked up a microphone 1 year after being back on my BMX bicycle. In 2011, I had made 6 finals at the highest level of racing BMX in the professional class. In October of 2011, I was in Orlando, Florida. I was racing neck and neck with this guy, David Herman, who was the top American athlete for the 2012 Olympic Games. We were racing neck and neck, about to get to the first corner. He makes a mistake over a jump and it causes me to crash at 30 miles an hour. I put my foot out and I almost shattered my tibia, snapped my ACL, and obliterated both my medial and lateral meniscus. It ended my racing career. And I was devastated because I felt like for the first time in my life that I was doing everything that I was supposed to do. And that I had this true belief and feeling that I'm supposed to go to the Olympics. This can't be happening. Like I saw it, I felt it. Everything felt so real when I was in that prison cell. I'm supposed to do this. I had a knee surgery with no pain medication. Not before they put me under, not after I woke up. Tylenol was the only thing that I took because I told myself what happened with my hand will not happen with my knee surgery. And the one thing that allowed me to be resilient or persevere through this time of confusion and frustration and devastation was that for the years leading up to this, starting in prison, I was changing the belief system from I can't, I won't, and I'll never be able to I can, I will, and I am able, which meant while I was going through this devastating period of knowing that I was never going to race again and the Olympics weren't going to be my thing, was that something would work itself out if I stuck to the plan. Keep brushing your teeth, making your bed, organizing your stuff, connecting with other like-minded individuals, giving back to others. 6 months later, I started my nonprofit organization, the Free Will Project. And 6 months after that, I started coaching BMX athletes. By 2016, I'd become one of the most sought after substance abuse speakers in the country. By 2016, my nonprofit organization was raising over $120,000 a year, giving away $40,000 worth of bicycles, $10,000 worth of skateboards. By 2016, I'd coached 2 world champions, 3 national champions, had 25 athletes from Australia to Bolivia. And July of 2016, my top female athlete, Brooke Crane, called me and said, pack your bags, Hoff. We're going to the Olympics. In July of 2016, Brooke Crane was selected for the United States Olympic team in Brazil for BMX racing. She placed 4th place in the finals. We missed a medal by 1 person, but I'll never forget the times that we got to share and what it was like for me to be there. I tell people for the longest time, I didn't understand why I had to go as a coach. And during the pandemic, I had more time to think than I've ever had since I've been in prison because I lost my job basically. I realized that I needed to be there as a coach because as an athlete, once you get to the Olympics, you're put in Athlete Village, which is like a huge dormitory. You're not allowed to leave. You eat cafeteria food. And for 1 week, you're filled with anxiety and stress and you can't sleep because you're waiting for this event to come up in a week that you've trained 4, 8, 12 years of your life, sacrificing a normal life that other people get to have to try and get a medal around your neck that really means nothing at the end of the day. Me, on the other hand, Brooke was sponsored by Rockstar. Rockstar paid for me to be in $1 million condo in Barra Tejuca, 20 steps from the nicest beach I've ever been to. And every morning I walked across the street, I sat under a cabana, I ordered an espresso, an acai bowl in the native country of Brazil. I wrote my letter to God and I thought to myself, this is crazy. The people that laughed at me when I started telling people this is what I'm supposed to do, this is supposed to happen. Like, you guys don't understand. When they'd be like, Hoff, come play basketball. I'd be like, bro, I got to work out. I'm training for the Olympics. They'd be like, what are you talking about, bro? You're not going to the Olympics. No, you don't understand. Like, I have to do this. Like, I'm supposed to do this. It's going to happen. People thought I was crazy. My parole agent, he told my mom I was going back to prison in 30 days. Some of my friends that race bicycles, Hoff, like, you can't come back and just race pro, bro. Like, you're going to have to like race amateur for a couple of years and get yourself back into this thing. Like, nobody understood like what the mission was. And then when I got there, it was like, oh my gosh, this is the first opportunity I've had to stop.
Is he frozen? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm like,
Wait, what?
Actually, threw all of us for a second.
It was his first opportunity to stop, so he stopped.
Right.
It was
Everybody wants
perfect
out.
timing. I'm gonna let him know.
dang, man.
Cliffhanger.
Uh-oh. Where'd he go?
I guess he'll be back.
Come back on.
No.
I texted him.
I told him it stopped right where he said stop. He's trying to reconnect now.
Right on.
We were worried about the storms here, you know, that we would end up with issues. Yeah, that's true, Candace.
Did wonder for a moment.
Yeah, we had about, what, 47 contingent plans in case the weather got bad and we lost internet here.
Here he is. He's back. There he is. Perfect timing.
Yeah, sorry. It's a good thing I have a phone because I have no idea why my laptop just disconnected. To wrap things up, my speaking has been the strongest calling in my life. And I finally opened my treatment center just 4 weeks ago, PH Wellness. And again, I've just wanted to challenge the infrastructure by creating a different way of having treatment. And so we built in fitness into our daily program. And we also have a world-class career center. And basically, individuals that come through our treatment center, we're also going to be working with counties through our nonprofit organization that we started called Merge Opportunities. One of my business partners owns $1 billion staffing agency, and he is built in his team into our treatment center that will train individuals that come to us for careers and then be able to place them all over the United States with a minimum of $21 an hour, 401ks, and healthcare packages to start. And so I've truly believed that treatment is not doing enough at helping individuals restart their life. It's not enough for us to just say, hey, this is why you're doing this. Here's some tools to help you stop. And 30 days later saying, good luck, never come back, please. If you do, call us and message us. What we want to do is provide more sustainable resources and opportunities that can help kickstart somebody's long-term recovery. With that, I'd like to open up the floor for us to do Q&A. Like I say, my life's an open book. I'm willing to take any type of questions that you guys may have and provide any type of insight.
Can you see the questions from your phone?
I don't know. So if somebody wants to read them off to me, that'd be great.
Christy, do you want to read it since it's yours?
Sure. I just asked what is your relationship with your parents now?
Sure.
Just curious, and has their outlook changed?
Their outlook has completely changed. They finally came back in my life about 6 months into my prison sentence. It wasn't a great start. My mom told me that they came to see me one last time sober and believed that I would kill myself with drugs when I got out. They were hurt and communicated from a place of hurt. I accepted the responsibility for that hurt and stuck with my program. And we now have a loving relationship. And I really need to commend my parents on the work that they have done. They truly have tried to learn as parents how to communicate to me in a way that's different than my brother. My brother and I are nothing alike. He's never used drugs. He can walk away from a half a beer. He can be spoken to maybe a little more sternly and less emotionally. My parents have done a lot of work on themselves to understand how to communicate to me without making me feel misunderstood. And so we have a loving relationship now, and we're all grateful for me still being here because many individuals do not get this. I think that if you have, go ahead.
I just said thank you. Sorry.
Tony, we do have another question from Sydney. She wants to ask her question, but I remember seeing you the last time, and a couple people might not have seen this, and I know that you bring everything full circle with the person on the curb taking that gutter water. I don't know if maybe you could speak to that.
So the person in the beginning that I had you visualize drawing gutter water was actually me. I grew up in a household. My mother and father have been married 46 years. Accumulated income of $250,000, went to one of the best school districts. I had everything that individuals would assume that you would need and not have to go through what I went through. And the reason that I say that is because if somebody like myself coming from where I came from can experience all of that, how much more is it our duty as human beings to extend hands to individuals that are growing up with so much less opportunity? where they're growing up in schools where the teachers don't care, where education isn't even a thing, gangs and violence and destructiveness are a part of their lives. It is so much harder for them to find the stability that I currently have in my life because my family had a stable home for me to go home to. It's so important for us to recognize that what I went through can happen to anybody, and that if it can happen to me, how much harder is it for individuals that don't have stability in a home to make those changes? We have to show up for those individuals.
I have a question.
Sure.
I have also, I want to say, let go of my 18-year-old male son due to his mental health, who don't want to admit that he has mental health. And he's called me, and I try to communicate with him. He only communicates when it's in his benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So when he does want to communicate, so I try not to communicate at all.
Sure.
Do you think that's wrong?
I don't think it's wrong, but I think that we need to make some small tweaks.
Because I heard you say, let him know you still love him. He knows I love him as a parent. I don't think I need, like, he called me on my birthday, things like that, make sure I'm taking my medicine.
Mm-hmm.
But he won't take his. If I call him, he won't go take his. He won't go to the doctor. And he jumps from shelter to shelter.
Sure. What I would suggest is this: if you have the ability to sit in front of a therapist, do it. If not, I would suggest maybe looking up books on boundaries. I think that for you, learning how to communicate what boundaries look like, right? So if we just look at this as a math equation, he calls only in his benefit, and then you decide, we're not going to talk at all because every time he calls me, he's trying to manipulate me.
Yeah.
The other side of this equation is when he calls, I communicate strong boundary, which means I do not allow you to call me and use me as your mother for your benefit. Yeah. You call me as your mother so we can have a connection as family. If you if you cannot follow the structure of this boundary, then we do not communicate. It's not because your mom doesn't love you. It's not because your mom's mad at you. It's because you will respect your mother's boundaries as my son. And if you can respect those boundaries, you and I can have a fruitful relationship regardless of what's going on in your life. Because as your mother, I do love you. And as your mother, I do want you to be in a better place if that's what you want for yourself.
So, yeah.
You see what I'm saying? It's just a small tweak in how we do that, but really it's communicating boundaries.
Yeah.
And don't assume that he knows you love him. I do really want to say that. Don't assume that,
Okay.
If you feel like I would say this, if you feel like he knows that you love him, that's when you should tell him you love him.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So I had a question. I'm 17 and I just graduated from high school, and I struggle with anxiety, like social anxiety and depression. And I've been I just started using weed and stuff, and I am kind of scared that it's gonna turn into something more than just weed. And I'm really struggling with stopping because my friends do it, and so I want to do it because then I feel left out.
Sure.
And I just struggle with it, and I would like any tips to learn how to stop.
Sure. So the first thing you need to understand is the power of influence, right? Mm-hmm. If I had this pen, right?
Right.
And you needed it, but I told you this pen doesn't work. And then your other friend will say, you and I are friends. And then your other friend also says the pen doesn't work. And then your other friend says, yeah, the pen doesn't work. Well, what do you assume about this pen?
That it doesn't work.
But how do you know?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So if we surround ourselves with individuals that communicate, not through words, but through actions, that smoking weed is a healthy coping skill that will not have any negative effects on you, then you continue to do what your surroundings are doing. The art of change comes around changing the environment that you're in. If you begin to choose individuals that don't believe that smoking weed is necessarily a bad thing, it's just not the way that they choose to cope with their experiences, you can then adopt a whole new way of thinking and behaving. The problem or the challenge comes because what you said in the beginning. Why do you smoke weed?
Because I feel left out.
Because you feel left out. When you feel left out, we're really talking about what? Loneliness. Loneliness is then accompanied with a story. If I'm by myself, I can't, I won't, I'm not able. So I give up what may be there for me in a positive way to stop the feelings of loneliness. See what you're doing? You're sacrificing who you are for a belief that is truly not true, that you cannot be alone and find new friends and do new things. So you just do what they're doing because they tell you without telling you that this is okay. So my advice to you is to ask yourself, where does my anxiety come from? How does my anxiety behave? And where can I go to learn more about this? I would say that you need to buy a book by Dr. Nicole LaPera. She is probably one of the most influential therapists in the world. She has an Instagram account called the Holistic Psychologist. She wrote a book called How to Do the Work. She believes that individuals like you and I can dive into this healing process and learn about ourselves, our experiences in life, and why we are the way that we are, that gets us to a place where we can begin healing and move away from self-destructive behaviors. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you know that your behaviors may cause problems. There's plenty of people on here that may be able to step up and start providing you resources for that. But two, you need to start looking at your environment.
Right.
You don't need, I'm not saying change it overnight. I'm not saying call
No,
everyone.
I know.
Okay. I'm not saying do
I
all
just
that.
struggle with that because it's like I don't have any friends, and my only friend is the one that I do it with, and it's hard. I mean, I have a boyfriend, and he doesn't do that stuff. But it's like I don't have any other friends, and I guess if I'm gonna have bad friends, I shouldn't have any friends at all. But it's just hard
not bad
because
friends. Don't say that either. Not bad
Okay.
friends. Making decisions that may not be beneficial for your overall wellness. That's it. What do
Right.
you want from life and how do you want to achieve that? And the person
Right.
that said you're not alone, trust me, every 17 to 25-year-old right now is having very similar conversations with themselves. It may not just be weed, it's all types of things. You're in a very confusing time in life. Society says you're supposed to have a career, go to college, and have all these things set up, when in reality, you're just trying to feel okay, most likely, and figure out what's next.
Right.
While you're figuring out what's next, though, you need to watch your environment, people, places, and things.
Right.
Because they can and will steal you from your potential and what you're capable of doing by influencing what you do, how you think, and what happens.
Right.
Get that
Thank
book.
you.
You're welcome.
We have a question from Brandy. What advice would you give to me as a mom? I have a 20-year-old son that I'm going through a newly discovered addiction. I feel defeated most days.
Yeah, is he in the house? Can I get some context about that? Do you want to get on here?
Brandy, you can unmute
No.
yourself.
Okay. So my advice is to, one, start educating yourself as much as you can on addiction. maybe even signing up for a therapist that's an addiction specialist, so you can begin to learn the difference between enabling and having strong boundaries that can help your son. I will tell you this, and I don't have any science to back this, but I would say that over 75% of young people that can't get sober that come to me have nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with their parents. They just can't stop putting money in their hands. They just can't stop paying their rent. They just can't stop paying for the phone. They just can't stop because they believe if they stop, their child will not be okay, not realizing that what they're doing is actually causing the addiction to continue its cycle.
Yeah, he doesn't live with me. I moved with my daughter in another place, so he lives with his grandparents, and he lost his job. He's lost his job. He just is kind of, I mean, I don't even know. I feel like I don't even know him anymore.
Sure. Well, you
It's
don't.
really-
If you're struggling like that, it's a different person.
Yeah, it's really difficult because he.
Are you providing money to him?
No.
Okay. Have you
And-
talked to him about going to treatment?
Oh, he doesn't think he doesn't know that I know now a lot of other things, but he is on probation and he has to take anger management classes. But I mean, there's a lot going on, a lot to unpack here. But
Sure.
Sorry.
Context is so important because an answer like this is not the same for everybody. And so I think most important is making sure that there's a line of communication that is continually, your mother is here to help you.
yeah, he won't even have conversations.
And that's okay. So if you have a way to contact him, just sending him those types of messages, your mother loves you, I miss you, I'm here to help if you ever want help. Then the work that you do on yourself is to help you understand that you can't change him. This is a process that he has to go through. Unfortunately, no matter how much you feel defeated, it's so important for you to do the work for yourself.
Yeah.
So if he ever becomes ready, you're in a position to say, let's do this. We got this together.
Yeah, he's just not there. It's
Yeah.
very difficult.
And trust me, if my parents were on this line with you right now, they would say, my son disappeared. My dad said every single morning he went to work, the first thing he did was check the jail registry because he didn't know where I was at. And he prayed to God that I would be in jail so I couldn't get the drugs that he believed was going to cause the coroner to knock on his door. And if I can get here, so can your son. I just want to make sure that you're doing the work that you need to do to increase your chances of him maybe wanting to get help.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yep.
I have a question, Chrissy, if I can jump in.
Sure, jump in.
So were you in active addiction when you went to prison? Or when?
Yep.
And how did that look? Did you detox in prison, and what were the early days like?
It took me a week to get to a nurse, and she handed me 16 ibuprofens and said, this is all I can give you. I bet you think about your choices next time. That was detox. It took about 90 days for me to get a full night's sleep. The heavy withdrawals were about 2 weeks. And it was in a prison cell that didn't open for 23 and a half hours a day. It was bad. But honestly, it was such a gift because for the first time in my life, I had to go through this emotional hurricane until the emotional hurricane settled. And then it was like, wait a minute. Like, you mean to tell me I can feel out of control, unsafe, and that eventually things will kind of work themselves out? Like, holy crap, I don't have to act on this anymore. It was the beginning of me starting to realize that I could make it through these really burdensome emotional events, but it was not fun. I don't ever want to do it again. I do know that prisons all over the United States, for the most part, no longer do this. Many of them will start to either put you on methadone or something like Suboxone and begin to treat the withdrawal symptoms so the individual does not have to be sick to the degree that I was.
Thank you.
There's a question. Did you blame your parents in the beginning?
In the beginning of my recovery, no. For all of my life up until then, absolutely. My parents were at fault for so much. And I think that that's why my recovery got to where it is right now was I was able to see that this had nothing to do with my parents, that I was responsible for my behavior. I was needed to hold myself accountable for my daily life that I would live moving forward. And the more I worked on my program, the more I realized that these things called resentments were actually at the root of a lot of my using, not just my mental health struggles, but my hatred for coaches and society, my parents, and these resentments that I held towards these individuals were actually creating emotional pressure that was making me feel uncontrollable. And so in the beginning of my recovery, no, I actually realized that my parents did love me and that my parents had made many efforts to try and help me. I was just not willing to see life from a similar perspective that they had.
A question from earlier on, when did you know or how did you know to seek a therapist?
I don't know that I knew when. I think that I just wanted to know more. And I knew that a therapist had the education and the understanding and the tools to help me learn more. My recovery has become this super immersive inward process, this journey in which now I'm 15 years into it. And you know, those that have heard me speak years ago, my speaking is not as intricately woven together with these mental health processes and articulating kind of emotions and stuff because therapy hadn't taken me there yet. But my desire to understand more about life is really what made me want to go see a therapist. I just wanted to know more. And it was one of the greatest decisions I've ever made because I don't have to be in a therapist all the time. I can go into therapist as needed. And I seem to learn something new every time I go in. The longer I'm sober, the more I learn and the more it benefits my recovery.
Okay, question from Candace. To be honest, I have seen too many people that just stay on methadone or Suboxone, and the doctors just keep prescribing it. It seems to be just a legal drug. I have a friend that has been on it for 2.5 years. Is that normal?
Is your friend committing crimes, losing their job, not being a productive family member or a supportive family member while they're on Suboxone? You could just type yes or you don't. Okay, so then my question to you is, why is that a problem? Sure. Yeah, so the way I want you, sorry, my dog's going crazy. Hang on one second. The way I see it is, if you look at addiction as a chronic illness, that means that an individual may need medication for the rest of their life. If that medication restores them to some level of sanity in which they can hold a job, they can be productive members of society, no longer use substances that put them at risk of overdose and death, then we should be supportive of that medication. And that's hard, right? Because it's also important to understand that there's two types of recoveries. There's abstinence-based only, which is typically AA, NA, or religious organizations. And then there is recovery by any means necessary. And one recovery believes that if you don't do it this way, you're not sober or in recovery. And it's so odd because the message is, well, just keep coming back until you get it. But what if they don't get a chance to come back because they die from a drug overdose? The recovery by any means necessary says, hey, we can provide you this medication that takes away this craving feeling. And because opioid addiction is so much different, we understand that craving feeling and the intensity of the craving feelings surpasses all other drugs and the amount of time that it lasts. We can provide you a medication that will take that away and help you get your life back. You don't have to keep coming back. The message is, welcome here, you made it. Right? And so we don't know if this individual in a year or two may start to wean themselves off of Suboxone. A lot of individuals take it for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and then slowly start tapering off of it. Some individuals are on a maintenance program for however long it's needed. So I think that the goal here is to just be open-minded, supportive, and recognize, as long as it's not becoming a problem in her life or where she's going back and forth, if that makes sense, using Suboxone, then heroin, and it's become kind of this crutch tool, then it's an absolute great thing. Yeah, hey, and you know what? 5 years ago, I wouldn't have said that. I wouldn't have. I would have told you you're not in recovery if you're not off of everything. I just have learned to think differently, because you know what? She could die tomorrow if she didn't have Suboxone. And then what would our conversation be?
Okay, we have a question. What was your spiritual experience, and what do you do to maintain your recovery specifically?
Sure. I had a friend call me in the summer of 2005. He said that God gave him a vision. I was in this vision, and that I was going to get 3 significant chances. If I didn't stop doing what I was doing before these chances took place, he said he saw that I was going to go to prison. He begged me to stop and said that this didn't have to happen. And I told him that I was on these pills again. I couldn't just stop. A year goes by, and it's November of 2006. I get pulled over 3 times in 4 days. I'm on felony probation for armed robbery. So each time I get pulled over, I get pulled out of the car, but the 3rd time. The first time the cops thought I did a drug deal, I hid this needle between my butt cheeks. So when they searched me, they didn't find it. They let me go. Second time I was pulled over, it was Thanksgiving night at 10:30 p.m. I hid 64 Oxycontins in a bag between my butt cheeks. I lied to the parole agent, or the cop, that I wasn't on parole or probation. He came back to the car, pulled me out of the car, searched me, didn't find anything, then let me go because my probation officer didn't answer the phone. It's Thanksgiving at 10:30 at night. The 3rd time I was pulled over was not the next day, but the following day. So 3 times in 4 days. The 3rd time I'm pulled over with a car that had fake tags. They were construction paper. The car hadn't been registered in 5 years, no insurance, driver didn't have a license. We both had drugs on us. The cop came up to the car, didn't ask if anybody was on parole or probation, and gave us a fix-it ticket and told us to take the car home to the person that we borrowed it from. As soon as the cop got back in the car, I immediately said, that was the 3 chances that Adam was talking about. And my girlfriend goes, what do you mean? I said, he said I was going to get 3 significant chances. And if I didn't stop before these chances took place, I was going to go to prison. I said, I got pulled over 3 times now in 4 days. 2 months later, I was invited to a church. And I went to that church. I was not a person of faith. And this is the God honest truth. I was invited to church by my drug dealer from the projects. He was a minister in the church. And people are like, what? A drug dealing minister? And I tell people, yeah, there was a bush that talked to a guy named Moses too. Like, I don't know. I can't explain things, but this is how it worked for me. And I went up to this altar call, and the guy lays his hands on my forehead. And I just remember I started crying. I didn't know what happened. Like, I was just crying. And he said, God has favored you your entire life and everything that you've done. You don't have to worry anymore. He's going to remove you from your addiction. That was January 21st, 2007. In that moment, I just kept saying, I believe, this is real. This is real. I can't believe this is real. I mean, this guy didn't know me. I had hair that hadn't been cut in months. I was wearing size 12 shoes that somebody gave me. I wear size 9, by the way. I had size 34 jeans on. When I was arrested, I was 137 pounds. I had a Dickies jacket on that blood stains. I didn't look like anybody that God had favored. I looked like I was cursed. And January 21st, 2007, that night I broke into a house that was up for rent. And the very next day I was arrested, and I was in the back of the cop car, and it just hit me full circle. God was going to remove me from my addiction. And when I got to prison, the big book was the Bible. I just kept reading it. I started to realize I'm here for a purpose. I need to figure out what that is. My recovery today is mainly built on spiritual principles, whether through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous or through the words of the Bible, which is where my faith is held up in. But I also go to therapy when needed. And I have a very strong support team that I talk to on a daily basis. My support team is very small, but it's very strong, and we have strength in numbers. Also, giving back is a big thing for me. And so I try to work with local institutions, jails, or treatment centers. My speaking is a form of giving back. My coaching was a form of giving back. My nonprofits are forms of giving back. Those are like my daily steps. Prayer and meditation is a big thing for me. When I'm at home, I'm right in this chair first thing in the morning over my cup of coffee. I spend a lot of time reflecting, praying and meditating for my own wellness.
That's great. Thank you.
Mhm.
There was a question, are there any drawbacks to the medication method of sobriety?
I guess I'd have to, not that I know of. I mean, sure that if you stop Suboxone, you may experience withdrawals, but stopping Suboxone would be something discussed with your doctor, right? It would be a formulated plan to taper you off the medications in which you would experience some of those withdrawal symptoms, but it would be done in a time in which it was believed that you could begin a taper off and see if you can manage your recovery without using medication for addiction treatment, which is MAT. Otherwise, I don't really see a drawback. Methadone, I'm not a huge fan of methadone, but you know what? There are stories of people that go to methadone clinics and they find the balance that the other young ladies found with Suboxone. So I think it's a person-by-person case, and those need to be done with medical professionals. For me to say that there is a drawback would not be doing justice correctly, I don't think.
I think we have time for one more. Are there any programs for atheists?
Sure, a lot of them. Smart recovery is not based on spiritual principles. There is a lot more evidence-based treatment that's coming out, i.e. smart recovery, that can get an individual to recovery. You don't have to be a spiritual person, although I do believe that is probably the most effective way, but that's me speaking from a personal experience. I think if you Google smart recovery, you can find lots of organizations that do not have the God component or spirituality to them, and absolutely pursue those, because really it comes down to identifying trauma, understanding how to heal, cope, and process that trauma, create new environments, and change the way that you think. So it's absolutely possible.
Well, this was fantastic. Lots and lots of positive comments. You've been so inspiring and so helpful, and sharing your story. We just talked about this. We hear stories, all of our stories, plus those we serve every day, all the time. And it's just so emotional. And you've been a great inspiration to all of us. So thank you so much. I don't know, Beth, Christina, Karen, if you want to add anything, but we've really loved having you with us.
I just appreciate you working with us over the months that you've been working with us, and we're so glad to finally get you here.
Yeah, no, thank you all for being a part of this. Such a wonderful turnout. Again, my encouragement is to be pioneers of change. For those of you that have a loved one that's struggling, don't give up hope. Remember, disconnect with love. Don't give up, and continue to try and reach out through love and have that communication. If I can change, I'm telling you, anybody can do it. There's just no way that a person can't change if I was able to do it. Again, I'm so grateful for this opportunity. Laura, I see you in here again. I love you so much. Thank you. You guys have all been great to give me this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Yes, thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
You.
I guess.
Good to see you, Tony.